like you said, Yimin, it's also great to see you again as well.
Yeah.
Last time was fun. It was a lot of fun having you on.
Right. Thank you.
The Lumina assessment tool that we took beforehand when we did our last episode, as I said in our podcast, I thought it was very revealing for me personally. And honestly, I'm not even saying this because you guys are all sitting here today.
Right.
I'm still thinking about it.
Yeah.
I'm still thinking. I'm thinking about the 3 personas,
Right.
And I'm thinking about when am I in an overextended state. Like these are things that I'm consciously at least aware of and thinking about on a day-to-day basis now.
Right.
Because I like I said, I have a 2-year-old at home, and sometimes it's not always easy. Right. I'm not getting my sleep, and I get frustrated, and sometimes me and my wife we bicker. And then I'm always just thinking,
overextended.
I'm always thinking, like, oh yeah, am I crossing over to overextended now? Yeah. Maybe I'm doing it a little too much, but it's fun to think about. And I just want to say that because it really made an impact on me.
Thank you.
It's really wonderful to have all of you here today. You, Stewart, Dr. Desson, Jonathan,
Right.
Yimin, you guys are all part of the Lumina team here. So it's really wonderful to have you guys on. Welcome to the show.
No, great to be here.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Yeah.
Yimin, you were saying before we were recording, you were mentioning a private conversation you were having with Stewart about his motivations. From your perspective, working with him, what's going on here?
Well, I think, in a very short statement, I think Stewart generally wants to build a better connected and inclusive world. And people just get attracted by the philosophy behind the tools,
Well, what is the philosophy behind the tools?
Appreciate who you are. We're unique, we are not, stereotyping to anything. It really resonates to every person. And if you get out of the box and you will appreciate who you are and you start to love yourself and then develop yourself.
Well, also what I like about what this tool offers, and as we talk, I also want to kind of branch out from the assessment tool itself. We can talk about larger issues. But what I like about the tool itself is that the idea of bias, and it kind of tries to reduce this idea of this bias that's intrinsic in all of us. And I love the idea of looking for strengths in people that don't fit the usual model of, let's say, a good employee or a good person at this or a good performer at that. And there are kind of strengths in all of us that often go so overlooked when we're just thinking based on in traditional means.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's pretty personal. So there is a whole system around it, a methodology and science behind it. But the trigger for it goes back to sort of the beginning of my own career. So I remember being, on some sort of leadership development program when I had a beautiful full head of hair. It's all gone now, but and somebody was sort of coaching me through some sort of psychometric, and they said, what are you? Are you really a thinker or a feeler? Do you make decisions with your head or with your heart? And I said, well, it depends. And they didn't like the answer, it depends, because they were trained in which we're trying to uncover which one you really are. Well, I'm not really either. I'm both. It depends who I'm with. It depends on the context. It depends what I'm making an effort to do. I do have free will. I don't just do what is totally instinctive all the time. So that experience was quite formative for me. It was like more than a decade later that a light bulb went off that we could do psychometrics differently and measure things in a different way and take some of the black and white thinking out of it. And as you said, take some of the bias out of it as well, because sometimes when we describe these opposites, unfortunately, because we're human beings and live in a culture, we kind of value one end more than the other. And importantly, the author of these things tends to value one end more than the other. So the obvious big bias across the globe in measuring who we are is an extroversion bias. We tend to overvalue being enthusiastic leaders, yada, yada. We tend to undervalue being introverted, thinking before I speak, being boundaried with my emotions, at least in the assessments and the questionnaires. So I've been rallying against that, which, believe it or not, in the world of psychometrics is kind of a radical thing to do. I did a PhD in this area, and challenging traditional statistical methods for building these things I bumped into some academics and a few road bumps where you're challenging what's been done for over 100 years.
Yeah.
So we've set out to do it more inclusively. Like as Yimin said, we like to see that we've created an inclusive way of measuring who we are, and it's because we want people to develop, and we want everyone to develop. We don't want to sort of do a lopsided development and load the dice towards people who are more extroverted, forthright, and traditionally likely to become, managers in big companies. That's the form of bias in its own right.
I mean, I went through something quite similar when I was coming out of university. We were doing a personality assessment as part of like career development, and by all accounts, it was probably a very good assessment. Research behind it, psychometrically fantastic. But then I was going through the report with the person who was doing the feedback session, and it told me I wasn't extroverted. I was very quiet, closed-minded, lazy.
Closed-minded and lazy.
Closed-minded and lazy.
The assessment results came with literal closed-minded and lazy verbatim.
Lazy.
Wow.
What else did it say? And it said introverted, very quiet, and argumentative. That's what it said.
How did you react to that?
Well, and then you read the bottom line of it. It was a report for selection basically, and it says not recommended for hire at the bottom.
So you'll be out of a job if you just have
and
this
this was
assessment.
meant to be a career planning, career development type of workshop.
You might as
I'm
well
like,
just throw your hands up in the air and be like, I give up.
what
There's
am I
no point
meant
in
to
living
do with
anymore.
Does the counselor know that you majored in psychometric?
well, this was one of my professors at the time.
My gosh,
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
Well, why? There's so many questions with that. Like, it's just so confusing to me. Like, first of all, why would that even be part of the possible results in an assessment when you're trying to help people? And two, like, why do you think it came back with that result in the first place?
Well, I think to answer your first question, I think it's because for a lot of these assessments, they're not built to help people. They're built to give an answer about someone. If you're a hiring manager,
So
if
it's
you're
more
a
for the
recruiter,
employers.
It's for the employer. They want to know whether this person is going to fit the mold of what they're looking for.
Yeah.
And speaking to
Because
Stuart,
they're the ones paying for this, right?
exactly, yeah. And so speaking to Stuart, saying, the typical biases against those people who are more extroverted, a bit more disciplined, a bit more open-minded from the employer's perspective. If you don't fit that box, if you don't fit that mold, then not recommended.
Jonathan,
for
you did
employment.
not fit the cookie cutter.
Absolutely
okay?
not.
Yeah. Yeah.
You didn't know that when you hired me.
Fortunately, nobody gave me that report when I hired you. But actually, I absolutely would have hired you despite that report. I would have enjoyed ignoring that report because I'm in tune with how much nonsense is out there psychometrically. So we are, in our own little way, what we're doing is radical. We're saying that's nonsense. Actually, you know what? I've had my own experience of the equivalent of what Jonathan had. I had it was like 20 years ago. And I did a psychometric, and it was when I was kind of researching everything, and I paid someone to coach me. I won't name the assessment because I don't want to be horrible, but it was a famous, like, Big Five, very well researched one, good stats, papers written on it, and a similar experience when they went through it with me, and they said, well, let's see, what sort of job were you thinking you might look for? And I said, well, could a big corporate job suit me? And they said, no, not at all. No,
That'd be ridiculous.
You have come out
Come
in,
back to
in,
Earth.
in the bottom 1 percentile for conscientiousness. Yeah. So I said, well, what does that mean? And they said, well, it can't go any lower.
You are the bottom of the bottom.
I said, okay, so why would I not be suited for a corporate job? And I said, well, you are likely to be, not good with process, lazy. You don't really want to be managed. You're terrible with time. You probably get fired from a corporate. It's not going to be good for you. So I said, well, I did actually have a pretty successful 15 career with the corporate.
So the coach did not know you used to work for a large
No, I
organization.
hadn't told them any of my background. They hadn't asked, I might add.
Right,
yeah. And then I explained to them I have had a successful corporate career, and this didn't seem to be a problem. But in how they measured it, it was. So I kind of played with them a little bit and said, okay, I get that I'm not that structured. It's true, but I think I might have some other merits. Could it be that I'm quite spontaneous and I kind of go with the flow, and I can be quite entrepreneurial and seize the moment, and I quite like that. And even, when I worked corporately, I was seen as someone that could shake things up and not always go with the formal way of doing it. So could that be something good you could say about this low conscientiousness in terms of my entrepreneurial skill? And they said, they looked through their papers and shuffled around a bit and said, no, we didn't measure that. That was the end of the conversation. So that also left me thinking, okay, having had the experience like a good decade before on the thinking feeling, and then this experience around conscientiousness, I had the idea on my head. I want to take some of the bias out. So people like me, Jonathan and others, which is kind of half the population, do get a fair shake of the dice when they go into recruitment situations. Although in truth, I have to tell you, my real passion, as Yimin said, is development. So there's like two big uses for questionnaires and psychometrics. One's selection, one's development. We need to do the selection fairly accurately without being lopsided and biased, for sure. But we also need to develop people. And that's the big growth area in psychometrics that I've seen over the last 20 years is, when I did have my corporate career, it tended to be the higher echelons that benefited from having a psychometric report, getting a coach, being developed. And the thing that thrills me is it's happening further and further down the organization. Obviously, it's companies that can usually pay for it, but it's coming all the way down the organization. So in many organizations, everybody can experience development through this sort of approach. And that's what inspires me. I kind of see it as part of that movement to take the psychometric, and it's really not just a psychometric, it's a way of developing yourself, to the world. Yeah. That's what excites me.
Well, I think the thing to me that should be so clear is that the psychometric tool or assessment is just the beginning.
Yeah.
It's just the beginning. It's just kind of figuring out, okay, where do we start? What do we need to work on? What do we attack here? And so it feels like in the past, because I've taken in the past assessment tools before, it feels like it was just more of the end all be all. Like, oh, okay, this is you. And this is the bucket you fall in. And there wasn't like a further discussion about it. In the world today, how often are these psychometric tools being used, and who are they actually being used by? Is it the recruitment firms that are using them, or is it the actual employers?
So, I mean, firstly, it is kind of all of the above. So there's two really big ways of using it. One is selection, or you could call it recruitment. The other is development, to help people get on. And as Jonathan said earlier, who the report is written for is pretty important. If it's written for the employer, they might put something like not suitable for this job in the report. Obviously, you wouldn't do that in development. Actually, I wouldn't advocate, I would never put that on a report, not suitable. That's
regardless, selection or
regardless. It's just against our kind of philosophy, because a psychometric should be more something that informs a dialogue rather than makes a decision.
Well, is it like the HR department handing out these tests and conducting them?
So if I was to take a step back and look at the whole of planet Earth, I mean, the biggest users will be people that have HR in their job title. And within that, it subdivides into the HR folks who are, bringing people into the organization or handling internal promotions. So they're using psychometrics a lot for that. Actually, that's the sort of genesis of psychometrics, was literally 120 years ago. That's how it started. It started with, can we figure out which jobs to put people into? That was the beginning, if you like. And development is something, using it for development is something that picked up, much, much later, maybe 40, 50 years later. It suddenly occurred to everyone, you know what? This could also help us develop rather than just be a tool. I guess the philosophy, if you're a HR person using it to recruit, what you're really saying is, I want to get control over my recruitment process. I want the best people. You don't necessarily have to be so concerned about their well-being and everything else. You may be, but there are many organizations where they just absolutely want to get the best people. So just as a small example, I was in Brazil a few years ago, and one company there, they literally had like 10 jobs, and they literally had something like 50,000 people apply for it. And they just needed to use statistical techniques
Yeah.
to kill off as many of their applicants as possible because they didn't know who to interview. I'm not saying this is a good thing, but your question was who's doing it. And if you have unlimited people applying for jobs, that's what people do. We don't really want to be part of that. It's not so thrilling and humanistic. Interestingly, though, in many, many developed economies, like in Shanghai, I'm from London, it's kind of, that's not the scenario. Yeah. So most of the HR people we work with, they don't have unlimited candidates for jobs. Quite the reverse. They're struggling to attract the best talent. So the last thing they want to do is kill off potentially good employees by having a psychometric report that says, as it did to Jonathan, not suitable for hire.
Yeah, they're filtering out even more potential candidates, right?
That's right. So a more contemporary and sensible use in recruitment is like, okay, I've got someone in front of me, I might be recruiting them. Can I explore with them their strengths, their challenges? Are they self-aware? Do they know what this job involves? And will are they going to be engaging with the rest of our team? And I may even consider the profile of the other people in the team as well could be part of a decision.
It almost kind of sat weird with me. Like, I understand that, especially for really large companies that may have a lot of applicants, a lot of people under their employ, they want to come up with some sort of structured and maybe formulaic, more efficient way of filtering candidates. There needs to be some sort of process, I guess, right? But it just always sat wrong with me that there was a department of people that wouldn't really end up working with the person if they got hired, kind of pre-filtering candidates
Before they even met
the person that they would actually be working with.
Yeah, but sometimes it's a reality. So Stewart give a good example, like 50,000 candidates, 10 jobs. Now, we have a client in China. They are in the high-tech field. And every year they hire a large number of top students from top universities. And they told me their hiring rate is about 9%. So they have to do this selection. They actually utilize our tools significantly. They have to sometimes sacrifice, quote unquote, some potentially good candidates because they can't afford to interview every single one of them. But the other thing Stewart was mentioning was more about probably if you really care about the well-being of the organization, when you hire someone new, you really want to look at their profile and to see if they fit into the organization and how they can fit quickly into the team. Yeah, but I don't see many of the employers doing that, to be honest. People are just running fast, They don't have the time to look at
onboard them properly. And
I think looking at where they'd fit in the team is important because guess what? We don't want to do cookie cutter recruitment and have everyone in the team the same. When we've, Jonathan, gone into organizations that have usually not used psychometrics, but the boss has recruited in their own image rather unconsciously, and you find a team where everyone is kind of the same sort of person. And then you find there's a collective blind spot, the culture's not so balanced. And if they do recruit someone that's counterculture, I saw this in a bank recently in London, they're gone in 3 months. Like, it's like they're so counterculture because their personality is different. It's incredibly uncomfortable for them. And that's really what you don't want. And you don't want a culture with a blind spot that's so strong in certain qualities and so absent of others. We want inclusive teams where we value. That doesn't mean everyone needs to be completely balanced. Of course not. But it does mean that you need to be self-aware and have an awareness that people are different and want to connect with different people and want to value different opinions.
I've seen it go wrong the other way as well, where there's a senior leadership team and the CEO actively hired people opposite to how he was because he wanted some people to balance him out. But what actually ended up happening was you look at their personality and how they interacted. None of them were very happy because all of them were adjusting themselves to act in the way the CEO wanted them to, completely against what their personality was.
So they couldn't be authentic.
Yeah, exactly. Even though he had actively made an effort to hire people different to him, he still wasn't providing the environment for them to be who they really were.
So they were still trying to alter themselves in the image of their boss.
Yeah.
So people are playing a role in a way.
But I have to imagine, no matter how diverse or non-diverse a team is, I have to imagine that's a very natural instinct for employees in general, right? I can imagine myself working in a company, and I want to make my boss happy. I want to try to impress him. I want to befriend him, get in with the boss, right?
Sure.
And so you start mirroring the person. Like when you want someone to like you, you even if you're not aware of it, like you start mirroring them a little bit, right?
You do, and the truth is that role modeling works, whether you like it or not. So what the boss does, or anyone in a more powerful hierarchical position, tends to be replicated. People, as you say, they unconsciously mirror or copy it. You tend to get it back. So acknowledging that's how we are as human beings, it's on the boss to think, well, I need to go beyond that. I need to raise a bit of awareness. I need to let the team know that they don't have to be like me. I need to let the team know that I want diversity, psychological diversity in my team, and that I will value it. So, Jonathan, when I work with you, I need to remind myself, because we're like polar opposites. I need to remind myself, Jonathan is here to bring a bit of caution to my good ideas. Jonathan is here to check the evidence and the facts and put a pause in before we jump to make sure.
Practical.
Yeah, keep it practical, keep it sensible, make sure I don't do any crazy stuff that ultimately could be expensive and not work. So I actually have to remind myself every day, I want Jonathan's opposite gifts. I want those, even though instinctively in the moment I could be frustrated by them.
Yeah, and it's meeting in the middle. I mean, it goes the same the other way as well. I need to remind myself, when you have 17 good ideas at the same time, all as good as each other, that I need to indulge them a little bit as well, and not immediately start thinking, what's the best one? What's the way forward?
Actually, I have a good example to share. I remember a few years ago, I facilitated a team workshop, and they did assessment. And interestingly, the leader, who's a female leader, when I asked her, what's your favorite team building activity? And she said drinking. And what happened is she's actually very, very extroverted, and most of the team are introverted. And people were just laughing, say, hey, boss, basically, we just want to indulge you because you like drinking. We just go along with you. As a matter of fact, people do not like doing that. So that's a pretty shocking revealing, because the mandala, we have a team mandala. So every person is a dot on the chart. So you can look at the mandalas. Oh, she's kind of lonely up there. Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of levels to that too, because I've had that experience when I first moved here to China, growing up in the States. From a macro level, you have the American culture. And American culture usually, as we were talking about, extroversion versus introversion, puts more value on extroversion, being loud and being outspoken, and being tough. I mean, even if you look at a lot of the big moguls or CEOs that are kind of put up on a pedestal these days in the media, you have like Elon Musk, you have Mark Cuban, you have all these people who are just out there and seem very tough and outspoken and have no problems sharing their opinions on things. So I grew up in a culture like that. And when I first moved out here to China, the team I was working with wasn't responding to that. And in fact, it felt like I was forcing them to do something they didn't want to do.
Right.
And so I had to adjust to that. But like, that's from a macro level culture, but there's like little mini cultures, even within a society. There are so many different subcultures of people, and you have people who are more extroverted here in China for sure. And then you have people who are stereotypically more reserved.
Right.
And so it's how do you kind of manage that and have a feel for that? I think much easier said than done.
Yeah, I think it's very easy to stereotype people. I mean, it's natural.
Yeah.
If you look at someone, you're going to think about how you expect them to act based on what they look like, how tall they are, what job they have, things like that. But then, as you say, even within a demographic of person, there's a huge amount of variance within them. I mean, more often than not, your guess is probably going to be wrong. So I think it's important to look at them as an individual, which is a lot more difficult because you need to take more time to get to know them, to speak to them, to actually learn who they are as a person beyond their stereotype.
Yeah. I want to just touch back a little bit on this idea of diversity. And my question I was having while, you guys were explaining your philosophy behind it, and to Jonathan's story as well, is like, how do you find that balance between being diverse just for diversity's sake, which doesn't always work out, versus being, I guess, more performance driven in terms of who's just right for the task? Like, is there a happy balance in between where you try to find a little bit of both? Or is there a proper time when to lean one way or the other?
The way I see it, the diversity movement, diversity, equity, inclusivity, and so on, you've got two different schools of thought. You've got the people that believe in it because they're activists, because they want justice, because they can see oppression, they can see that certain demographics or ethnicities have not had it fair for a long time, and they're wanting to make the world fairer. So their movement is sort of morally driven. And then you've got the people in organizations that are more business focused, that are not necessarily opposed to the moral argument, but the truth is they're focused on the organization and making it work more effectively. And their relationship to diversity is slightly different. They want to know, is there a benefit to it in my organization? And so I do see these two kind of different worlds existing around, let's call it a diversity movement. And what we like to do, we like to try and bridge that gap. So there are things that we do to support diversity. There's charities we support and so on, because we do believe in it and we want to make the world fairer. But actually, I believe we've also got to be rational. That won't cut through to lots of large organizations. You have to recognize the motivation of people that are running businesses and departments. So you need to make the case for why valuing diversity will help them improve the effectiveness of their organization or their team. And of course, we can do that. There's plenty of research that shows if we are more diverse in multiple ways, gender, ethnicity, but obviously we're focused, our angle is psychological diversity.
Like neurodiversity?
And neurodiversity as well. So that's also a fascinating topic in its own right, something we've researched quite a lot. So, when I was growing up, I never even heard of ADHD. I don't know when the term was fully coined and became mainstream. Whereas, and people wouldn't get support. So I'm not saying that as a good thing at all. People were unsupported in their neurodiversity, in the 60s and the 70s.
Just seen as a bit difficult and naughty or
you'd be sent to the naughty room basically at school. So that's not good. So what we have now is a much greater understanding. And the curious thing about it is, the statistics say between 1% and 2% of people are neurodiverse. That's based on academic studies that look at the number of people diagnosed. We did some research at Lumina in real organizations with real people, and we got them to say, have you been diagnosed? And sure enough, not many have. But then we asked them, do you think you might have these neurodiverse qualities? That went up quite a bit. And then we gave them the questionnaire that a psychiatrist would use if you went for a diagnosis, and we looked at the threshold, and we found 20% of the workforce would be at a level where you would want to investigate the neurodiversity. So that's not a minuscule minority, that's a sizable minority. Yeah. So we think this is also an interesting diversity issue that we need to pay attention to. We need to make the workplace friendly for people who are neurodiverse. And of course, the moral thing, it's the right thing to do. I believe it. But from a business point of view, it's also an incredibly sensible business thing to do. So, for example, there's a organization in the UK that we work with, and they're pretty much exclusively recruiting from an autistic pool of talent in their software development area, and it works incredibly well for them. Other cultures very different. That's kind of a more extreme example. More mainstream, it's just making sure that the workplace does allow for the full spread of different people, including neurodiversity.
But I feel like I have some loose grips grip on the term neurodiversity, but like, what does that actually mean? To be neurodiverse.
You want to talk about neurodiversity, neurodivergence, and difference between that. Well, if we look at neurodiversity, the term neurodiversity simply means that everyone thinks a little bit differently, right? Everyone's on a, if you can compare it to personality or how you think or your thought process. Everyone is neurodiverse because we all think in a different way. When it comes to neurodivergence, that's when it's kind of like the extremes of the spectrum of diversity. That's when it's, they might say it's atypical, right? So that's when you see things like autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia. There's dozens of different forms of neurodivergence, but it simply means that the way that your brain processes things, the way you interact with the world, is in the extreme ends of the spectrum of neurodiversity.
I see. And I have to imagine, like, it starts from this idea of being neurally diverse, and through that, the results, like if you're neurally different than someone else, your behaviors, your mannerisms, your personalities are all going to be different, and it kind of influences everything about you. Right?
And everyone is different, but when it gets to the extremes, that's when it's kind of stigmatized as something that's wrong, something that's a deficit. And I think if you go back even 10, 15, 20 years ago, if you look at the research around neurodivergence in education, in the workplace, it's all looked at in purely negative terms. What are they lacking? What support do they need? What can't they do, right? But now we're seeing more of a movement towards more of a strengths-based approach to looking at neurodivergence and actually flipping on its head. Yes, people who have ADHD face certain challenges, need certain supports, might need extra help with certain things, but that comes with the flip side as well. So we're starting to see a movement towards looking at the strengths and kind of the undervalued talents of neurodivergence as well.
Yeah, I've felt that too. I felt in like recent years, this idea of being autistic doesn't have nearly the stigma it used to have. Like, there are very successful people who are on the spectrum.
Sure.
This is actually funny. We had a guest on.
Yeah.
Her name is Anna. And after we recorded a podcast, because she's really into this kind of stuff too. And after we recorded the podcast off air, she gave me the there's like one like test for like autism, whether you're on the spectrum. It's like the official test. Yeah. She gave it to me. I took it. And apparently I'm on the spectrum.
You are.
I found out last year, at least through this test.
It might have been the same one that we used in our research.
Maybe.
The AQ10.
Yeah, something like that. That I'm on the low end of the spectrum, but I show up on the spectrum nonetheless.
Interesting. Yeah.
And as a 40-something-year-old person, I found that out last year. And my reaction to it actually was I wasn't surprised. Because I've always felt that I think it's rooted in the idea that I always felt like I was always an awkward person. And in different, whether it's professional contexts or social contexts, I always felt I was always like the awkward one. And I never knew why. I just chopped it up to like, okay, maybe I'm just an awkward person, whatever. I'm thinking about it now and thinking about, I think the way I process things and the way I interpret things and the way I think about things is just very different. Not a good or bad way, but just different. And it makes me come off as more awkward and makes myself, because I feel like I'm very self-aware in these situations as well. And I tend to overthink. And I feel like it's like this self-feedback loop that I'm in where I'm being awkward and I'm aware that I'm awkward. So I feel more awkward about it. And the more awkward I feel about it, the more awkward I behave. Exactly. And I've always felt that growing up, even to this day. So, I mean, maybe that's part of it.
Remember last time you shared a story about being very empathetic?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you feel empathetic, you cry when you see homeless people. So I guess it's kind of falling into that category because you tend to maybe overthink some things and some people.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess if you use the same thoughts, going back to Jonathan's story at the university, I was wondering, Jonathan, you have graduated a few years now. Does the professor still do the same counseling? Still label people as lazy?
Are you still in touch with?
No, not for a few years. But I think it definitely still does happen. I've seen.
So this is something very sad for me to see,
Yeah.
because I see so many top universities are using those like tools for how many years? Maybe 50 years, 60 years, with the same methodology and same thoughts. And
so they're still using these, at least I think probably in your perspective, these outdated tools?
I think so. What I see is a lot of leading university are still using those older tools, and people are having new thoughts on neurodivergent people being more positive rather than negative. But if you're going to the normal people and university students, if you label them with like you're unfit for a job, how does that make? Because Stewart probably can share more because we are doing a lot of university work at around the world.
It still blows my mind that would even be an answer, to a tool or.
But the thing is, if you look at the case of the Brazilian company there, that's what they're looking for. They want a definitive answer when they've got 50,000 people. Is this person worth more time to interview, worth more money to go through more assessments?
In the workforce, I can kind of see it, but in an educational institution, that's just crazy to me.
No, it's crazy.
For people who haven't even graduated yet.
Yeah.
I mean,
there's what are you meant to do with that?
Yeah. What are you supposed to do with that information?
Just go home.
Well, tragically, that's why you will find there's a much higher unemployment rate in people who are neurodiverse, particularly say autism. It's significantly higher, across the globe. What we found with that, though, that's really interesting is when we did our research on people who were neurodiverse and people who weren't, so we could contrast the two groups, it was not the case that the people who were neurodiverse were having all these negative qualities. In fact, when we linked it through to like competencies at work, we found people who were high on autism actually were better at certain things like quality control, planning, and so on. And people high on ADHD actually had more competence in some of the creative disciplines, and were quite good at like strategizing and seeing different things, abstract thinking. So our research is completely counter to the narrative of the last few decades. You need to look at the strengths of people who are neurodiverse and recruit based on those strengths. That would be eminently sensible.
Your point about diversity for diversity's sake versus diversity for a business case. I mean, you've been told in the past that if you produce an assessment that tries to be humanistic, tries to balance both ends, tries to value all ways of being, that you're going to sacrifice how that can predict performance. In that it's basically not going to be as useful for predicting future behavior.
Yeah, I've literally had that experience. So when I did my PhD. In psychometric, so if you just let me nerd out for a minute, I have to go full on into the stats and the numbers and say how we've constructed this questionnaire and what are the properties. Is it reliable? If you do it again, you come out kind of similar. And then we have to gather data on performance at work. And I have to show that our Lumina Spark questionnaire can predict your performance at work. What would make you good at running a podcast? Which are the particular traits that do that? Which are the ones that don't? And interestingly, in doing that, the perceived wisdom was always, well, if you try to take account of a lot of these biases, you're like trying to build it with one arm tied behind your back. And maybe your predictive validity, the ability to say who's going to be good at this and that, might go down because you're trying to be too nice, as it were, to people who are diverse. Now, I'm here to say that turns out to be not true. That's a prejudice. So in our research, we found that the ability to predict people's performance at work is at least equally good if you take account of these biases and attempt to neutralize them. So in our approach, we do stress the strength of being highly introverted. Even if somebody may be high on autism, there is still a benefit to their high introversion in terms of reflection, thoughtfulness, and so on. And that filters through into being good at certain jobs at work. So I don't know if any of this is making sense or if I've gone a bit too statistical on you.
No, I like it. And like we talk about the extroversion, introversion thing a lot because that seems like just very common.
Yeah.
A lot of people understand that. What is the case? What case can you make for an introverted person being good for leadership positions?
So there's a huge extroversion bias in leadership. That's probably where the bias is most strong.
Exactly.
Literally over the last 100 and even 50 years. So the original theory around leadership, which I think comes from like 1800 and something, was called the Great Man Theory. Have you heard this one?
Yes.
The Great Man Theory. Okay, it's like a Victorian theory.
Okay.
And it basically says to be good at a leader, you need to be great and a man. So there's a little bit of gender bias there.
Just a little bit.
Yeah. But you need to be, wait for it, highly intelligent so you can work out what your followers should do for them. Of course, you need to be a man. You also, therefore, need to be pretty intelligent. You also need to be tall. They favoured leaders that were tall. Slight bias there as well. And it was all about being forthright and blunt and bold. Now, that theory, of course, is appropriately debunked in the modern era, but that you could see where the extroversion bias comes from. To be fair, in more contemporary terms, if you want to make the case for introversion in leadership, the first thing you've got to do is measure it, and you've got to measure it constructively. So if your way of measuring leaders is cheerful, enthusiastic, persuasive, those are all extroverted ways. And if the way that you look at introversion is timid, shy, withdrawn, well, those aren't good words if you want a leader. So you need to find ways of measuring extroversion that's effective in leadership. I think before I speak. I listen to what the people around me have got to say before we make an important decision. I'm more boundaried with my emotions. These are all things that can really help a leader, and they're more introverted qualities. So we work really hard when we do measurement and psychometrics to be really balanced about introversion, extroversion, particularly in leadership, to say you can lead with either. The key is understanding where you are, having self-awareness. But as you said a little while ago, self-awareness is kind of not enough. If it's just like, oh, well, that's interesting, and then you carry on and do the same, that's what I call the booby prize. Yeah. So you need to be aware of introversion, extroversion. If you are more introverted, there are times when you need to consciously dial up your extroversion. And if you're extroverted, there's times when you need to rein it in and connect with your introversion. So I'm more extroverted as a leader, generally. You could ask Jonathan and Yimin. I think
we are both introverted.
Yeah, they're introverted.
Same here.
I make a conscious effort at times to rein it in and not, even though I'm bursting to say something, even though I want to say, Jonathan, do this, Yimin, do that, let's go. I don't. Why? Because as a good leader, if I want to empower people, I need to give them the space to figure it out and come back, and I need to listen to what they say.
I think along with the stigma, there's a lot of assumption too about this, is that people, I guess, assume that if you're introverted, you can't be extroverted when you need to be.
I mean, it's so hard to shake a label that we've placed on ourselves, and I think that's why there's this I think it was a French sociologist, Durkheim, I think his name was Emile Durkheim, and he had this theory called labeling theory, and it was mainly used with young offenders, right? And what he basically says is that if someone in a position of power, it could be like a parent, a teacher, your boss, someone who you respect and has authority over, if they place a label on you, you are more likely to act according to that label, regardless of who you are. So in his case, he was talking about young offenders. If you label someone, someone who's 12 or 13, 14 as an offender, then you're putting them into that kind of self-fulfilling prophecy, is that you're labeling them as offender, and therefore they think, I'm an offender, this is not what I know how to do, and I'm going to keep offending. Yeah. And it's the same with labels that we put on people, like being introverted. If a teacher tells you that you're lazy or that you're very quiet and withdrawn, then that's what you're going to think about yourself. Because if you're 12 years old and someone who's 30 years old and you tells you that you're lazy, then who are you to argue with that? Yeah. And then that creates that vicious cycle of never being able to break out. And in your case, being able to take charge more, right, being able to push yourself out of the comfort zone. So I think that's why it's so important not to place those labels on ourselves, and especially when we talk about in an educational setting, placing a label on a child can be so dangerous, because it's very difficult for them 10 years down the line to then shake that and be able to break out of it.
I've worked quite hard, and I'm sure I've failed, but I've worked quite hard with my 4 kids not to label them as they were growing up, to try and acknowledge what they do, but not to put anything that would wire into their brain that they're definitively this or that. I strive to do that at work as well. And actually the Lumina model is a really conscious effort to avoid labeling. You'll notice the words that we use in it don't kind of type people. So we don't make them this or that. And as you said, is it introversion and extroversion as 2 polarities? No, of course not. It's a continuum, but it's even not just a continuum. It depends who you're with.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
You know, right now I'm being slightly more extroverted because we're all chatting together. Last night when we were discussing stuff, I was a little bit more introverted because I wanted to hear what Jonathan had to say.
And I'd had a few drinks at that point as well,
and
so I was a bit
alcohol
more
was involved.
extroverted.
So he'd become more extroverted
Liquor
through
helps.
a little bit of liquor. And I
Liquor
was,
makes you a better leader. That's basically what we're trying to say.
it's a theme that's coming through. Yeah. So
Well, I think just to add on to the education part, you had a two-year-old. I've seen many parents, start to label their kids.
Yeah.
And that's pretty, they're not aware of that. Think about, if the parents, especially young parents who do not know how to, interact with their kids, sometimes they are overextended. They just label their kids, you're lazy. And that's gonna, leave an impact on the kids. And many parents, in my opinion, stop learning because they're busy raising kids. They're busy doing their job. They stop learning. And then, they're not growing together with their children. And if you do not have that awareness of, you need to be, how can I say, see your kids' both strengths and probably blind spots. How to describe your children is also I think it's quite important. Stewart is in the field. So he tried not to label their kids. The 4 boys, they're all different. They're all very interesting characters.
Interesting.
And by the way, he's got a brilliant kids. One of them is a pilot. One of them is Oxford,
Cambridge, actually.
Cambridge
Yeah.
PhD.
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to say is because I have seen many parents labeling their kids, and it leaves bad influence. This is not what we want to see in the world. And it's happening every day.
Yeah.
And kind of also, was I labeled as a child? Actually, yes, I was. Did my dad do that? Yes. He probably tried not to, but he did. Because you know what? We will mess up a bit and things will slip out and you only need to do it once.
I mean, it was like you were just saying, even subconsciously, you're going to do what makes your parents happy. Like you were saying, your parents were happy when you were kind of like being creative and had new ideas and stuff like that. And my parents would have been happy when I was being disciplined and getting things done and stuff like that. So you can even subconsciously, you're going to act in a way that, your parents react
my
well to.
personality is pretty creative, but I got positive feedback on that from my parents at an early year. So this is the way to impress my parents. At school, I'll try and do creative things, extra projects, and so on. And that's become part of who I am in my personality. So
Same thing happens in the workplace, right? If you encourage your employees to do things they're good at it, they will just feel inspired.
Well, the truth is that all bosses, in fact, are really surrogate sort of parents. Yeah, so and that works the other way as well. There's been plenty of times when I've been a leader in an organisation, and I can kind of tell that the way a member of staff is behaving towards me, it's as if I'm their dad or something like that. You can tell it's not just
asking
me.
for permission.
It's not just me in the room. It's their parent who I don't even know is in the room.
What about you, Jonathan? Do you see him as dad?
No comment.
Call him Papa right now. No, but I think in any sort of relationship where there is an authority dynamic there, it is relatable to parenthood because at the end, that's kind of what it is in its most basic form, I think. I think the labels thing, like I totally agree with everything you guys are saying about labels, but it's part of the human condition, right? Like we walk around every day, whether it's with our kids or not, or just on the street or interacting with each other. Labels are really hard to avoid because it's our mental shortcut to help us along.
Yeah.
I think the problem with labels, in addition to everything, all the problems that you guys have already said, is that we tend to see things in snapshots. Like if you were to take a camera and take a snapshot of this very moment, and you make all your judgments based off of what you see in this picture, it becomes a very still thing. There's no continuum there. There's no before, there's no after, there's no evolution.
Context.
Yeah, there's no growth. There's no change. It's just a still of what it is. And I think we like to think of people in that way. We like to think of people as, this is you.
Yeah.
And we don't like to, well, not that we don't like, but we tend not to think of people evolving, changing, growing, developing in any direction, for the better or for the worse, And we think of them as this still thing, and we slap that label on. That's what a label is. Like, you are this thing.
And you see that it's two-dimensional as well. You see them as who they are, not what you don't see. It's like,
Exactly.
if I see you a little bit stressed, and I might just think, oh, he's all stressed out. He's a bit aggravated or something. But I don't see that you've got a 2-year-old at home, and you've not slept for since 2 a.m. or something like that.
Yeah, for
so
sure.
you don't
There's so
see
many
the
more
depth,
dimensions, right? And so if you were to just think of something like that's always kind of changing and evolving continuously, like morphing into something, it'd be really hard to slap a label on that thing. But that's just not how we see things, right? And I think that there's a seed of truth in that, in the sense that maybe most people just don't change that radically, so labels are just an easy shortcut for us to use.
Well, kind of our brains are patterning systems. We're kind of wired to put things into boxes, partly because we want to stay safe, and we're trying to identify risk.
It's easy,
That's one
and it's
reason
low
for
effort
it.
as well.
Yeah.
We've evolved to where we're at now. Yet, what worked for us, for 100,000 years, is not necessarily what's good for our current culture and current organizational life. That's kind of how it is.
But you see the evolutionary benefit of that as well. If you're a caveman living in a cave and you see a shadow come up behind you, you're not going to stop and think about what that could be and what the threat is and whether it's worth running away or not. You're just going to run away.
Yeah.
I mean, what we're trying to do, in my opinion, we're trying to go beyond our sort of caveman brain, where we do just
Hopefully.
label people and so on. We're trying to.
That's a good slogan for you guys.
Yeah.
Go beyond the caveman brain.
Beyond the
Let's go
caveman. How about
beyond the
that?
caveman brain.
There's a book in it. There's a book there. But it's more like we want to create culture, certainly at work, where we can go beyond. We maybe the first step is to be aware that we are labeling. We are naturally projecting onto other people. We're bringing in some other relationships, some important people in our life, and they're contaminating what we're doing. It's good to be aware of all these things, so that you can park them and say, I can see there's a bias there. So an expression I often use is, I kind of want to own my bias on an issue. So I'll let people know I have a bias, and that's my way of parking the bias and saying, I want to go beyond it. And we've talked about introvert, extroverts quite a bit here. And I like that because it's something that everyone relates to. And there's even like an east-west divide on that in our data. You can kind of see there is literally more extroversion in, say, the US. And there is, I think, in our data, there's more introversion in Japan. Of course, on average, it's a distribution, and there's plenty of introverted Americans and extroverted Japanese people. You can kind of see it. But going beyond introversion and extroversion, there's some other areas where we do exactly the same that are they're less well known. The really, really big one is in our culture how everybody wants to be considered resilient, certainly in the workplace. I'm resilient, I hold it together, I'm calm, collected. This is something that's seen very positively.
Won't crack under pressure, right?
Exactly, won't crack under pressure. And then the opposite of it is seen as a bad thing, like
Fragile.
you're emotional, you're fragile, you're neurotic, you'll crack up and so on. Actually, there's huge biases in this as well that play out in the workplace. And if you do get labeled as an emotional, neurotic person in many organizations, it's hard to shake it.
It's probably the most kind of bias spectrum,
I think it's the biggest bias. I mean,
Which one? Which?
well, what it would be called unhelpfully in the academic literature, they'd talk about, are you emotionally stable or are you neurotic? And you don't need to be a genius to work out on that scale which one's better. Yeah. And so you will find in organizations that's an unhelpful labeling.
It's also a lot to do with the definition and the terms you use for defining those things in itself. You're already starting from a ground of bias. Certain terms are inherently one's positive or one's negative to begin with.
Yes.
Instead of looking at it from a strengths-based perspective where, okay, well, what are the strengths here and what are the strengths there?
And many of these terms, science moves slowly. Many of these terms were created like 50, 60 years ago when society was very, very different. These were labels put on the data. We use different terms. So, for example, we talk about you being a risk reactor as an alternative to neurotic. A risk reactor means you do scan the environment for risks. You do feel stuff. You do maybe have a sense of anxiety when something's not right. If something's not right, you might want to jump on it quickly and sort it out. and that's to do with your emotions and feeling. And maybe you are good. If something's frustrating you, you'll express it. You're good at letting out and catharting what you think and your feelings. Actually, that can be really helpful, because if we do the opposite and we're so resilient and so positive about everything that we never let any negativity out, some cultures suffer from like a false positivity where we're not being authentic.
It's what they call it, like toxic resilience sometimes, where you're just kind of ignoring all the negative.
Well, toxic
feeling.
positivity, right? That's a term.
Positivity,
Yeah.
toxic
Yeah.
optimism.
To just keep toughing it out.
yeah,
right?
tough it out, and
Yeah.
eventually you'll crack.
You crack
break.
eventually. Yeah.
You know, and I can relate it to my personal experience. So I'm the opposite of the risk reactor, is what we call a reward reactor, where you are naturally more confident and a bit more of an optimist. I tend to score higher on that. But guess what? If I'm confident and optimistic for too long, apart from driving Jonathan nuts, what actually happens is there will be stressful things that happen. I don't want them to happen, so I kind of ignore them, sweep them under the carpet.
It'll be all right.
And then they'll be okay, don't worry. And then another thing happens, and Jonathan's like, no, there's a risk here. No, don't worry, Jonathan, it's going to be fine. I sweep a bit more under the carpet. Then after 6 months, it builds up. Then actually, I will be stressed, and I'm waiting to blow. So it's much better to express things as you go along and cathart it, rather than trying to sweep it under the carpet. I don't know if that makes sense to you, Jonathan.
No, absolutely. Yeah.
You're kind of my opposite on this. So
Yeah,
you,
I mean,
you will let me know.
I think I'll probably go too far the opposite way sometimes, but it is kind of about kind of mitigating risk on my side of things. Obviously, you need both.
Yeah.
Most people kind of prefer one or the other, but I think again, it's the same as extroversion, introversion. It's like you need to be able to see the benefits of both sides, but also where it could go wrong as well, because it can and it will go wrong.
I love the term you use, catharting. Yeah. Because as you're talking, this dynamic is exactly me and my wife. And so from a personal level, I need to cathart. I need to call out the issues that I see, and I need to confront them head on. And we need to talk about it. And maybe we don't have a solution, but as long as we're addressing and we're aware of the issue, and I know we're both on the same page on that, it helps me reduce my anxiety about it, and it's cathartic. Her mentality, her character is that she goes into what, at least from what I see, and this could be my bias against her, is that it's like kind of a denial state, right? She wants to deny it for as long as possible. Like, no, it wasn't that bad. It wasn't that bad at all, right? And so there is a certain positivity and strength to that for sure. I think she's very strong in that way. But then it drives me crazy, because then it's like, you're not even aware there's an issue. Like, then that really drives me crazy. It's like, I see it as like there's a problem, and you aren't even aware there's a problem, let alone like trying to address it. And so when things are coming up, and especially when it's things that are more stressful and maybe a little more urgent, it really drives me crazy. And we both get frustrated at the end.
So me and my wife, we're the same as you, except the opposite way around. Yeah, so it's my wife that needs to cathart, and it's me that, if I'm not careful, will be thinking, wasn't that bad, was it? But I've got a funny example for you. When a number of years ago, like, some builders were building some houses next to where we live, and lots of dust and stuff was coming over the wall, and our garden was a mess. And my wife said, go and speak to them. We need a new fence put up. They've damaged the fence, and we need the garden cleared up because they've done it. So I'm calm, I'm resilient, I'm an optimist, no problem. I go and see the builders. Yeah, I explain to them calmly and rationally, cool and collected. They agree that they will sort the fence out, tidy it up. I come back, Deb, don't worry, it'll be done. When will it be done? Well, the next few days. Of course, it's not done. So Deb says, please go and sort it out. So I go back to them a week later. Look, you did say that you'd sort out the fence. And okay, yeah, we'll do it. I go back home. Of course, it's not done again. Yeah. What's the problem? I'm being too calm and resilient and a little bit optimistic, putting faith in random builders. Yeah. So Deb says, let me try my approach. So she goes to see them, bashes the door down, goes in, and kind of vents at them. This isn't good enough. She lets them know that I'm really frustrated. You've messed up my garden. It's important to me. That afternoon, they fixed the garden and the fence. And that kind of does play out in organizational settings as well. Depends on the culture. I worked in an operational area of a big business once, and I got feedback. You need to dial it up a bit, Stuart. We need to know you care. And what did that mean? That meant it was okay in this operational culture to vent. Yeah, it showed that you were passionate.
Yeah.
And so that was part of the culture. And if I didn't adapt to it, everyone kind of ignored me being calm and optimistic. Yeah. Of course, it's different in different cultures, but this is a polarity in personality that also suffers from a bias, just like introversion, extroversion. And even, I don't know what your psychometric report that your professor gave you said, whether it looked at this in you.
Yeah.
So it's not just the conscientiousness that says you're lazy and you're out, but often these reports will kick you out if you are too emotional. Would that be right?
Highly neurotic,
Yes.
unstable.
Yeah,
Yeah.
unstable, I think, is the key word that jumps out to people. Like, oh, this person's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a really unhelpful label to say
for
someone's
sure.
unstable. And these labels are hard to shift. So I can also recall another dimension of personality, which I'd now call being like a big picture thinker versus a sort of sensible, grounded, down-to-earth person. But I remember applying for a job and being told, you're a creative type. And it sounds positive, doesn't it? Stuart's creative.
don't
You're a
want a
creative
creative
type.
type.
But not the way they said it. The
No,
intonation didn't sound
exactly.
positive.
It was used as a reason for not giving me the job. Yeah, and I can still recall one person would talk to me and say, "Is this more of Stewart's creativity?" And that wasn't meant as a compliment. Yeah, and so the label, even the label, which I think is should be a positive label in this organization at this time, was a negative label, which I kind of really wanted to shake off.
So this brings me to, I think, a bigger question right now is that, because we've been talking from an organizational perspective and somewhat from, I think, the perspective of employers and maybe trappings they fall into. For the young graduate or for the guy or girl that's looking for a job right now in the workforce, like knowing all this, what can they do to help themselves?
You mean knowing the bias they're facing, or
Well, yeah.
knowing-
Well, I think knowing everything that you guys know and all the research that you guys been doing and all the contact you've been making with the real world, like, I guess from the employee's perspective or the potential employee's perspective, what do they do? Like, how can they better help themselves in terms of self-development, finding a job, knowing that these biases and these labels do exist in the real world and they might have to confront these things?
I would say that the first thing to do is to become aware of it. We do work with lots of universities to help young people get jobs. We were with Hong Kong UST just a week ago. Back in the UK, we work with a phenomenal charity called the Amos Bursary that works with young people to get them to university and into a job. So self-awareness is critical for young people. Actually, part of self-awareness for young people can also be when they become more aware of who they really are, focusing on growing their self-esteem to give them a stronger sense of self so they value themselves more. When you go into a potential recruitment situation, you want to have a strong sense of who you really are.
And you can also maybe push back on certain assumptions or labels from the employer side and being like, look, these are my strengths, and you can turn what they might assume to be weaknesses into strengths and make the case for yourself, maybe.
Exactly, and in the modern world now, an interviewer should like that. They should like to have an assertive potential candidate
Who's sure of themselves.
who knows who they are and is willing to challenge, and is willing to advocate for their strengths in the role, irrespective of what HR's job description might say, and so on and so on.
And I'd say the key thing you said there is who they really are. Because I think, we see, we always get questions about, does personality change with age or whatever it is? A little bit, it does. You sometimes see massive changes for younger people. People are leaving education, going into the workforce. But generally, that isn't because they're actually changing. They're not getting more extroverted.
they want to fit into the environment, maybe.
Not
or
necessarily.
organization. Yeah.
It's more that they are actually learning who they really are.
Oh, I see.
When they have that freedom to express themselves, when they're not in school, when they're not living with their parents, when they're not being told what to do, the more you're in the more you're in that kind of environment, the more you actually learn who you really are, and you can start to actually play towards your strengths versus play towards the strengths that you've been told you've had that might not actually be who you are. So I think the sooner someone can work out what their actual personality is, their actual strengths are, then you can start to really decide kind of how best to progress.
So one way you can do that is you've got that stronger sense of who you are, your preferences. As Jonathan says, who am I like really underneath? But how do I adjust in the work environment? What am I dialing up and dialing down? That's all part of it. If I have got the luxury of multiple job offers, or if I'm contemplating which companies to apply to, one thing we often share with young people is do an assessment of the culture of the organization you're thinking of applying to and see if you think for you it's a good cultural fit for you. Would your personality and your way of being be good in that organization, and gather data on that? And if you go to an interview, speak to the people on reception and everyone else and ask them questions to try and find out what the real culture is like. Because one of the reasons people can be dissatisfied in a job is when they discover 6 months in that there's some invisible cultural forces that they don't like and doesn't suit them.
Well, they've said it's one way, and you're actually in that organization is completely different to what they put.
So don't view an interview as like they're assessing me to see if I fit. View it that I'm assessing the organization to see if I want to be there, and looking at your personality. And if you like, you could say looking at the personality of the organization. You're trying to figure out whether that appeals to you. I think that's pretty important.
Yeah, I think probably what most young people or most people in the workforce or that are trying to apply to be into the workforce right now, I think this is probably a situation across the globe. It's just not a great time right now, and probably struggling. They don't have that luxury of choice. They're probably just trying to get whatever job they can get, and then they're going to have to just deal with issues of cultural fit, from a personal level. They're going to have to deal with things that aren't going to be ideal for their situation, but they're not going to have a choice in the matter. And entering into a situation like that, is there anything they can do to at least make the ride a little bit more comfortable for them?
And I get that. I mean, 2 thoughts on this. One is, and I can recall getting my first job. I just wanted a job. But once you get that job and you orientate and build some experience, you can plan for your next job. So it could still apply further down the line. But parking that for a moment, you're asking what can they do if they end up in a role or a job which maybe for whatever reason isn't perfect. One thing that we share around personality is you need to know who you are. We've talked about that. You need to like dial up and dial down dependent on who you're with. That's a great thing to do. But there's another bit of your personality, which we call overextended, which is really helpful to know what triggers you. So if I'm in a job that I don't think is quite right, it probably means somebody somewhere in that job is saying stuff that triggers me. And when it triggers me, I sort of jump into what we would call an overextended mode, which is not being at my best. I maybe don't enjoy it. So for Stewart, I like to be logical and reasoned, but if I get triggered, maybe I'll start arguing and be argumentative, and that's not so helpful. Or sometimes when I'm leading, I like to have consensus and get everyone on board, and that's all cool. But if something happens and someone's getting upset, and I don't want them to be upset, I might get too much into compromise and consensus and work kind of too hard to pull them together. So that's what I might do. So if we can help young people understand, because we're all different, what triggers them. We have this really, really great quote from Viktor Frankl, who's a psychologist from the last century who survived Auschwitz. And the quote goes something like this: between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space is our power to choose. And in that choice lies our freedom, our psychological freedom. So we have a way of trying to teach what Viktor Frankl was saying there, which, he was kind of saying that even in Auschwitz, he had more psychological freedom than the guards who were in a permanent fear state. So applying that to what we're talking about here, to young people in jobs, it's useful to know what might trigger you. and see the stimulus and response. And there are ways that we can get better at not getting stressed out and doing our default response that might not be so helpful and so enjoyable. We all do it differently.
Yeah.
Okay, some people do mindfulness, some people do counseling, some people talk to their friends, some people have a drink. My mum used to tell me to count to 10 if someone at work says something that triggers me, and I'm in that stimulus and response. Maybe even just counting to 10 before actually saying something can be a way of helping me notice the space and maybe making a better choice.
Yeah,
So,
there's a buffer there. Just being aware of your triggers puts a buffer in that it gives you at least a moment or space to react to it. Because I think most often is we're not aware of our own triggers and we just immediately react. And we're not even aware that this is happening. We're just like all of a sudden we're in this argument. We don't even know how we got here, or we're in some sort of feeling or emotional state, right?
And often the mechanism behind that automatic instinctive response, the mechanism behind that is exactly the same mechanism as when we label people, when we look at someone in a very kind of superficial way. There's a behavioral scientist called Daniel Kahneman. He had a book called Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, where you have kind of system one thinking. System one thinking?
System one,
system one, system two. So system one's very instinctive. It's automatic. It's low effort. It's based on heuristics and biases we have. But then we need to move towards that system two thinking when we need to be able to take that pause, reflect on the situation. How do we want to react? In the same way when we look at other people, instead of looking at them as a stereotype, think about it, look at them, look at the context behind them, and be able to make a proper judgment around it. Then you can actually have, a better interaction with this person, build rapport with them better. Or in this case, when you take that pause, you're able to actually react in a way that's not your stressed instinctive self, but rather a productive way forward.
Yeah. Do you guys think that awareness is the only way to get to system two? Like you have to be aware of what's happening in order to even enter system two?
my view, yes, it starts with self-awareness. Stopping at self-awareness, though, as I said earlier, that's the booby prize. Oh, I'm more aware, and then I keep doing the same stuff anyway. No,
that's what I do. That's exactly what I do.
Disaster. So you do see people that I'm really self-aware, and they carry on. So no, you've got to be self-aware, but there is more to it than that.
Yeah.
You then have to take some action and note what to do with that self-awareness, which can be noticing that people are different. It can be making an attempt to build rapport with them. Ultimately, we want to collaborate more effectively with other people. We want to get on well and have an enjoyable, productive experience. That's where we're heading with it. I mean, in the context of this discussion about people overextending and getting stressed, if you do put a pause in and you've handled it, but the other person hasn't and they're overextended, it opens up the possibility. You mentioned empathy earlier. You can have some empathy for the fact that you can see that they're triggered. You can see that they're not at their best. And if I'm really doing a good job as a leader, I want to help other people get out of that. It's not easy if you're on the receiving end of it.
Not at all. No, in fact, that I would think that, and this brings me up to a great, I think, topic of discussion is the older I get, the more I see my existence in my life boiled down to relationships. That's all it is. Just in some form or another, it's some sort of relationship with somebody, right? It can be a very transactional relationship. It can be very surface. It can be very personal and deep. It can be at work. Everything we do in life boils down to some sort of interaction, right? Everything. And so all these interactions are one form of relationship or another. And what I find is that I feel that most of the issues that I'm confronted with in my life these days is something going not ideally in the relationship or in the communication one way or the other. And so going to what you're saying is that I feel that when I'm trying to practice self-awareness and I can be empathetic, but the other person isn't aware of these things and is maybe going down a road, I feel that what ends up happening with me is that my feeling is that I get pushed over because I feel like I'm giving ground, right?
Yes.
I'm the one that's trying to compromise. they're not, because they're not aware of the situation happening. And what happens is I feel taken advantage of.
Yes.
And I think that leads to a feeling of both frustration and even resentment in this in the fact that I feel like, oh, well, I'm trying to be the bigger person, I'm trying to be a better person, blah blah blah, and they're not. And again, this could all just stem from my own bias as well.
No,
but that's how I
some
feel. I feel taken advantage of in a situation.
I've had and still do have similar experience. That what you've described is a common dynamic. I can remember a number of years ago, someone had a very different view to me on something in business, and they were pretty full on. And I was really working hard to listen to them, play back what they said, really heard them. And I spent like half an hour really hearing them, really drawing out what they were really thinking and clarifying everything. And at the end of it, they said, yes, that's right. Okay, let's do it now. I said, hold on, stop. I've been listening to you. I've really understood it. Now I want you to listen to me.
Yeah, to reciprocate.
I've eked everything out in this dialogue. It doesn't mean I agree. I'm now about to tell you I disagree. And they were really shocked because they thought normally when people listen to them and they get heard, that means they've agreed. So somehow my encouragement to you, and of course to myself, is to find an assertive way to still keep your self-awareness, still listen to people, still have compassion, but not let them steamroller you into thinking by doing that you're some sort of soft touch. I know this is easier said than done. I think the key for me, for Stewart, it's like, how do I help myself to be more assertive? You know? Although I do think I would still say what you're doing is the right thing. There's a great Stephen Covey quote that I like, seek first to understand, then to be understood. So if you do want to influence someone, you do need to understand them first, have some awareness and so on.
But it doesn't stop there.
But it doesn't stop. That's not the end of the story. That's just... You know, it's necessary, but it's not.
Hard, or at least it's hard for me to get to the understood part, right?
Yes.
At least it seems that it's hard for me.
Well, because then you're dependent on them to actually want to listen to you.
Exactly.
And be receptive to it.
And then there lies the difficulty, at least for me, is walking that tightrope of avoiding conflict as well. Because with the episode I did with Yimin, I'm very conflict adverse, right? I don't enjoy conflict. I tend to when I'm not in my, at least when I'm not in my overextended persona, I avoid conflict at all costs. And so what ends up happening is, in order to avoid conflict, I end up compromising. And I feel like if somehow I'm trying to get over that hump from understanding to being understood, it requires almost some degree of pushback, hence conflict.
Yes.
In order to stand your ground. And you have to be ready for that. And you have to be prepared for some degree of conflict, I think, in order to stand your ground, depending on the personality you're talking to as well.
I have one suggestion. I had a similar situation like you. I always tend to compromise. Sometimes I feel like I'm giving too much. I think one suggestion is, you mentioned we'll have all kinds of relationship. One is transactional. Try to talk to the service people over the phone. Sometimes you want to ask for more. That works. I tried that. For example, I got a luggage damage. I was very adamant. I said I want a compensation, and I wanted more than 200 compensation, and they agreed, because that helps me to become more assertive.
So looking for environments,
talking over the phone instead of being in person.
Because you talk to the phone, because like you can complain lies.
Because you're not going to actually fight over the phone, like physically, right?
You can avoid that. So what I'm trying to say is, because when you are facing with your intimate people in your life, you tend to give a lot. Maybe because you are looking after their interest and you forgot yourself. But if you try, in a controlled environment by talking to a service person, try to see how that works.
You mean, are you saying practice on the service centers?
Practice.
Yeah, they're there to help you.
Well, sometimes, because you do have a real case.
But then there's also a situation where the relationship is kind of it's lower stakes, because the relationship doesn't mean as much. So there's kind of less to lose versus when it's
But sometimes you don't know if you can be assertive, because you're afraid of being assertive might hurt relationship. But it might work the other way around.
Yeah, I think it depends on the other person, right? I think you probably just have to operate under the assumption that the other person is also able and willing ultimately to reason, and is also, I guess, on the same page with you is they're probably also trying to avoid conflict, right? Like very few people, except for maybe like actual psychopaths, like really desire conflict, right?
Right.
And so most people feel more comfortable without it, and so maybe it's just having more faith. But then, man, I talk to some people and I have no faith in their ability. I just feel like, okay, this is gonna
Not
go
going
bad.
anywhere.
Hey, you know what though? It isn't just psychopaths that are comfortable with conflict. I think that there are quite a lot of people that are okay with conflict and robust
Yeah.
conversation. I think you are on like the people-focused end of the
Yes.
spectrum. Me too, by the way. Everything you said, I could say me too. Even though I know this stuff, yeah, it's hard to actually do it. Yeah.
Right.
So, I mean, what do? I remind myself, yeah, I'm really people focused, but I don't want to become a doormat and be walked over.
You want to be
So
productive.
I want to be
done.
I'll still be diplomatic. I always am. One technique that I use is simply for an important conversation, I write down in advance what I'm going to say. Now, I also have a little technique where I separate out things that are absolutely factual. They'd stand up if you went to court. Yep. And I always start with those. Actually, I start by connecting, but once you've connected, I say, this is the issue I want to speak about. And I give the things that are irrefutable. Yeah. And we can have if they want to dispute it, we can get to the bottom of the facts. And then I move to my interpretation. And one way of taking the sting out of the upsetting them for me is I own it as, look, based on those facts, this is what I'm thinking. This is my interpretation. And I'm putting it out there so they can dispute it. I'm not saying I'm right, you're wrong. I'm saying let's have a dialogue around my interpretations and they can then give me theirs. So that's one technique that I use to try and keep my people focus, but be assertive when I know that I do need to address something.
That's actually, I think that's a really good point because you're starting from a place of fact. And then you're going into the personal interpretation part of it.
Yeah.
And I think what happens so often is that we jump in from the very beginning into the personal interpretation part.
Exactly.
And that's where the conversation or the discussion or the exchange gets stuck because you're arguing or you're going back and forth on the interpretation, which really has no end because if someone is believing something and you're believing in something, it's just your word versus their word and your feeling versus their feelings. And it's not so productive.
It can be an endless cycle.
Yeah, but when you ground it in something that both of you can't dispute, and then you're saying, well, hence that's why I feel this way, that could be a more productive way of...
So you, like me, you're more people-focused. People that are maybe Jonathan, more outcome-focused, won't be feeling the same uncomfortableness, yeah? And what you want to do, and I do this with Jonathan, I want to make sure that Jonathan doesn't win all the arguments because I back off, because I'm like you, the nice guy. We need to find a way of making sure that people-focused, outcome-focused can like
Yeah, so how do we stand up to all the Jonathans?
Exactly, it's the Jonathans, yeah.
Well, the thing is, for me,
blame
I
everything on him.
think I'm more kind of, I was going to say attracted to conflict. I'm more willing to dive into conflict, but it's still uncomfortable. But for me, it's more of a principled thing. It's that I do not want to let someone walk over me. I do not want to let someone win, for lack of a better term. So it is still uncomfortable, but it's less uncomfortable than if I just took a back seat and let them do what they wanted and kind of let them walk all over me. So it's a bit of a
and that is a difference. That's like a difference between us, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I'm curious, like, what's it like can you sense when I'm trying to put some facts on the table and then have an interpretation?
Yeah, and
do you see it coming?
I think I do. I think whenever you try to practice any of these techniques, I see like a little shift in you. It's like you go away from normal Stewart to
He's on to you, Stewart. he knows your tells.
no, but you can, and that's okay because kind of and it does work, these things. And I think when you put the facts out on the table and then you move on to the interpretation, it takes the personal element out of it. It's objective at that point. And I've started practicing that as well.
Yes.
In my personal life with my girlfriend. And it does work. You were saying we often jump to the interpretation side of it, how we've received it, but then we also ignore kind of how they've intended it to be received as well, and their intention. So when you stick to the facts to begin with, and you have the opportunity for the dialogue to say, these were the facts, this is how I received it, but then say, is this how you intended it to come across? How did you intend for this to be received or for this interaction to go? So with the kind of, but anchored in the facts itself, it takes the personal sting out of it.
Yeah, I think that's huge as well. I think, I mean, famously, and for people maybe who have been listening to this podcast or our podcast for a long time, know that like Eric and I, we get into a lot of like bickering sometimes. Eric is the other one of the other co-hosts of the show, and so like most of it is off air, but like he has this habit of taking what I say to him very personally all the time.
Okay.
And when I'm not intending it personally, I'm just trying to resolve things, right? But he takes things very personally because that's just how he's wired, and he's admitted to this, right, several times. And so everything to him feels like an attack. And in the beginning of our relationship, I was never accounting for that because I just wasn't aware of it. I just thought like, why are you blowing up right now? Like there's should be no reason. Like we're just talking about things. But I was unaware that the way I was saying things to him, he was interpreting it as me attacking him, his character, or his performance, or whatever it is, some form of attack. And so I think in our conversations, we were always jumping into or diving into head first this pool of interpretation. And there was never any discussion of how we got there. Like if I feel some way or if he feels some way, we never really talked about, oh, well, how do we end up here? How did I end up in this feeling or in this situation or in this emotional state? And it was just, there was no roadmap there of understanding so that I can at least empathize and see like, oh, I see how you got there. I may not agree and I may disagree with how you got there, but I see how someone could get there. And I think once you build that empathy, the conversation is almost a lot more productive and less
subjective interpretation, how they intended it and how you received it. You need to have something in the middle to bridge that gap.
Yeah. And I think so often in our lives, it's those type of wires that get crossed, right? But in everyday life, realistically, there isn't always this chance or this moment to really like sit down with someone and talk it through and have this kind of conversation we're having now. You're just reacting to things in the moment, you move on, and so often these wires get crossed and never resolved. And that's when these bad interactions happen.
So I've got another good idea for you. Right. So again, speaking from experience, when we've got the facts and then we move to the interpretation, it could still be that you said like Eric is feeling whatever it might be, frustrated or hurt or whatever. I've also found it helpful in interpretations to kind of separate out the one or two words that describe the emotion. Like I'm frustrated, I'm hurt. And kind of acknowledge that as if it's a fact. It's not completely a fact, but it is kind of irrefutable. If someone feels hurt,
just share how you feel.
They feel hurt. And then go on to the interpretations, which is more like what you're thinking around it. And the reason I say that is it's quite helpful, I think, to acknowledge people's like pure emotion in the process as well. And separate that out from what you're thinking and your interpretations. And of course, the same the other way as well. I want to be, if I'm feeling sad about something, it's useful to hear the other person acknowledge, gosh, looks like you're sad about it. That can be helpful. That can then help me share my interpretations without everything being contaminated with the fact I feel sad.
I accidentally did the opposite of that with my girlfriend once.
Yeah. Tell us about the opposite. What happened?
Didn't go well. When I told her I don't care about her feelings about something, that didn't go down well. I was just trying to stick to the facts, and
You're being too radical, too irrational.
I quickly learned that that's not the best way of doing it.
Well, I would never do that myself.
Again, Jonathan's the problem. We've established that.
We've got that clear. Yeah.
That's the main takeaway from today's podcast. So often on this show, we talk about building habits. We talk about developing ourselves, improving ourselves. And we keep struggling and debating this idea of, can we really change? And is that really a thing? Or are people fundamentally remain the same and just really change in the margins? And we say this because we've tried to improve ourselves in certain development. I mean, we've come a long way, but we've failed at many, many things as well. And we routinely fail at certain habits we're trying to build, and we end up back to square one. And so before, when we were talking about this idea of finding yourself and being aware of just like who you are, who you truly are, that leads me to think about this question of, are we always just this person and it's just a matter of us discovering who we are along the way?
Mm-hmm.
Or are we actually changing? Or do we really have the capacity to significantly and fundamentally change ourselves? Or are we only just discovering who we are?
That's a great question. So, here's my take on it. I mean, the first thing to say is there is no scientific definitive answer to your question. Like, there's no research that's been done that proves it either way. That's kind of interesting. Historically, it's kind of been taught for the last 100 years that your personality, your psychology is pretty fixed for your life. Generally, you evolve a bit with age, but that's how it's often been taught. That's not quite my perspective on the research that we've done. So there is a bit of you that's pretty hard to change. There's probably a bit of you that you can't change. There's a genetic bit to you that you're born with, and we inherit some of it from our parents. And the research would suggest you might not even be able to be aware of that bit of it. Even self-awareness can't go everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, that's a bit of you that will be stable over your life. You can, through self-awareness, try and find out more about it and acknowledge who you are and work with it. But there's a second bit that I see, which in the literature they call it your sort of characteristic adaptions, which mean as we grow up, even if I'm a twin in the same family, I will have a different experience to my twin. I'll have different experiences with teachers. My parents will teach me differently. And what happens is our personalities start to diverge. Our experiences in life, particularly early ones, will cause us to develop in different ways.
And sometimes random experiences as well,
And
not necessarily.
It's not conscious. It could be totally
It
random.
could be a car accidentally hit you or almost hit you once, and that is a random thing that then fundamentally changes who you are or how you react
It's
to
random,
things.
but it's a major incident.
Yeah.
It alters
So it's
maybe
often
your life course.
But it can't be controlled or predicted
Right.
in a way that maybe how your parents raise you could be a bit more controlled.
And of course, we've got free will that develops, but random things happen. If we were born in a different era at a different time and we were in a war zone, and that was what we experienced during our childhood, we will have a different personality and a different view on the world. So there's the bit that's hard to change because it's kind of genetic. There's the experiences we have a huge impact. And as we get older, the choices we make put us into and out of different experiences. The evidence that says we can change, you can do it by taking it to extreme. There are people who were blind, but we can attach through science sensors to them and give them completely different input to their brain than they would normally get from their eyes, and they can recover some form of sight. That's an example of the brain being pretty good at rewiring itself and somebody changing. So if we can change on that, of course we can change in terms of who we are and what we identify with. And then the third bit, which is much more changeable in terms of who we are, is the narrative. It's the things that we tell ourselves. It's our stories that we pick up in life. We learn them, of course, from our parents and people around us, but they are much more susceptible to being changed with our conscious will and our thinking and what we want to do. That's why people get coached and do therapy or whatever. They're often looking at that internal narrative. So Stewart's view on this is that we indeed can change. That doesn't mean we all do. So the data would suggest lots of people don't change. Lots of people, like how they grow up and the narrative in their mind, they keep it for their whole life for whatever reason.
I think
that's possible.
One mechanism that goes behind that is like the idea of where does your sense of control come from? Do you have an external locus of control or an internal one? Do you believe that you have the ability to change yourself, or do you believe that there is an external force acting upon you that's imposing this personality or this set of behaviors on yourself? And I think if you do take that slightly more deterministic view that you actually someone else is controlling who you are and how you act, then it's very difficult to change. But if you can take a bit of agency and kind of reclaim that control into yourself, you know, with the Frankl quote, take a pause, you can choose how you want to react. I mean, you know, everyone has a preference, but there's nothing stopping you from acting in a completely opposite way to what your normal preference is. And it's about reclaiming that sense of control.
What I want to add on is about your life purpose. Because, you know, when you grow up, you probably have different life purpose, different dreams. When you become a parent, you have different dream for your son. And so our life goes on, our life purpose shifts. Some people become religious, they become a completely different person. They have a different life purpose. So when you have because life purpose is longer vision. If you have a longer vision, and you probably will decide how to spend the rest of your life. If you have no purpose, you don't do anything. You don't need to change. Why bother? Right?
Yeah, it's so true. I think I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, because obviously I can't help but relate everything back to myself, right?
Of course.
And I'm thinking, is this feeling of loss of control just a part of age? You know, maybe there was this naivete that we had growing up where I just felt like, oh, I'm in control of the world, you know, I can do whatever I want. And the older you get, maybe the more experiences you go through. And certainly I think politics, COVID-19, you know, everything, all this turbulence we've been through in recent times has probably contributed to that. But maybe part of it is also just this age where as the older you get, the more you realize that the less control maybe you have in your life, and that how important relationships are, and the strength and quality of those relationships really, really impact your entire existence and your livelihood.
I think age plays a part. I prefer to call it wisdom just because it sounds better.
Experience.
Just to share one example on that, because you mentioned COVID-19. I think before COVID-19, I was getting into a mental state of things are going well, I'm in control, doing this, doing that. When COVID struck, it did cause me to really realize I'm really not in control. Things like that can happen that have a huge impact. I had to do quite a bit of soul searching about what next, and acknowledge that I'm not,
omnipotent.
I'm not omnipotent. Yeah. Funny enough, I've had that feedback before, actually.
That should tell you something.
Yes. So, yeah, but it's easy to slip back and think, maybe I am, or in the way I behave, I am. But of course, I'm not. And that's my recurring life lesson.
Yeah.
And there's also a thing of what is life? Because we can be gone tomorrow.
Yeah.
We can live to 120 years old. How do you plan that?
You can't.
You can't.
Yeah.
So,
and it's our undying effort in trying to plan that brings us a lot of headaches, I think, as well.
Yes.
Look, I wanna wrap it up with this. Is I guess with all the stuff that you guys are doing, and all the research you're doing, and all the interactions you guys are having out there, is there something that really jumps out to you today that you feel is more of an urgent thing to address?
I'll go back to what I said earlier, and I think in terms of kind of people, especially younger people, trying to decide what they want to do, what their values are, what their purpose are, I think it's so important to reclaim that control internally. Of course, recognize there are external influences and things you need to consider, but ultimately reclaiming that sense of agency for yourself is so important to actually being happy and doing what you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And to be honest, from a very practical perspective, your story really, really resonates with me, because I do really hope that young people, especially college students, do not take those crappy assessments that he did when he was in college, because that really hurts, how they're gonna see themselves. And so, be wise in how you choose, the tools and the people who can help you.
Think critically about it as well.
Think critically about it. Yeah, you can go along with those fun things, but do not go along with those things that really they're not helping you.
Yeah.
They're probably for entertainment, but not really helping you. And they were designed 60 years ago and to really hurt people like Jonathan and myself. So we're against that.
But you guys seem to have come through pretty well. Okay.
We're doing all right.
Despite the message you
Coming
guys
back
got.
to you, Stewart.
I think, Jonathan, you mentioned part of knowing who I am enhances my critical thinking. So there's so much on the internet today that is dubious content. If I can know who I am and strengthen that critical thinking faculty, I can kind of put a filter on what I let in, because there's so much more information coming at us. I would say that's the basics. And then the second bit, of course, is acknowledging we're different. When I've done that, not just stopping there, but trying to understand people who may be completely our opposite in many, many ways, and reaching out and valuing that and connection. So if I was to summarize it in a world, we need to have stronger connection with other people. If we can all do that in our personal life, it will definitely help, I think, the bigger picture. And it's kind of what motivates me, Yimin, to be here, to work with you, is in our own way, we're making a contribution to helping people know themselves and better connect with others.
Yep.
And that is, I think that's enough. I'm satisfied that that's a more than a good enough contribution to planet Earth.
Yeah.
I hope.
Yeah. Here.
I feel like I want to remind myself and anyone that's listening, it's more about, it's going beyond just the basics of who you might think you are, right? So there's general terms like we said in the beginning, like extrovert, introvert, and I think a lot of people just stop there, and that's just the very, very surface level.
Yes.
I mean, it's really understanding, like, if you're an introvert or if you're an extrovert, like, what does that really mean for you?
Yeah. How does it help you? How does it stop you?
Yeah, how is it hurting you? How is it helping you? What does that really mean? And diving down into the deeper layers of all these things, and what does it really mean for your life in your context, instead of just stopping at these generic labels that I think is so easy for us just to
honestly,
be lazy and stop there.
They should bring in a law in and make it a crime. It is a crime to stop at the generic labels.
And so many of us do. I know I used to. I just,
It's
you know,
easy,
just
it's
like, oh, I'm an
quick,
introvert. Yeah, that's just okay.
Right.
It's what I call, it's the booby prize. I think I've got it at a nice high level with the labels, and it's caused me to stop. That's where some of these things can literally block your personal development rather than enable them. If I stop at the label and I think I've got it, I've just curtailed my true development. I've curtailed my true self-awareness because I think I've got it. You don't get it once and you're done for life. The truth is, with the Lumina Spark portrait, like you said, it was a while ago you looked at it, but you're still processing it.
Still processing it.
We're still processing it. It's kind of a lifelong journey. So self-awareness isn't something that you do once. I'm done now for life.
Yeah, I don't think there's an end to it, and for sure, we often stop prematurely in the sense that we have this false sense of achievement. I think that speaks to, and that can be an example in terms of maybe how we think about ourselves and our own development as well. We get so caught up in just, okay, I've figured it out. I'm this way. But what do you do with that? Like we said in the beginning, like that's just the assessment tools, all this kind of stuff is just the very beginning.
Right.
Yeah.
But anyway, I want to thank all three of you for being here so much. I think this was a really wonderful conversation. Stewart, Yimin, Jonathan. If people want to get connected with Lumina, how do they do that? What's the best way?
Well, if they're in China, feel free to contact our team. You know, we are on Red, Xiaohongshu. We are on WeChat public account, and it's probably the easiest thing for them to reach us.
What is it under? Just Lumina Learning, or?
Oh, it's all Lumina Learning.
Okay.
You know, if you search Red Lumina Learning, search 公众号 and search 视频号, they're all Lumina Learning.
Okay.
Yeah, and we have practitioners around the country. We have about 300. You can reach them. You can reach us. We can arrange all kinds of activities for them to have a feel, and also if people are really interested in purchasing our services, we're more than happy to assist them with assessment and also debriefing and also development. It works both for corporate clients and also consumer clients.
So individuals as well.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah.
Is it the same search for international platforms?
Yeah, it's luminalearning.com is probably the easiest way internationally.
Okay.
Yep.
We're just a couple of clicks away.
Or on LinkedIn, connect with Stewart Desson.
You can
or
connect with me
Jonathan
directly,
Cannon.
Stewart Desson, Jonathan Cannon on LinkedIn, if that works for you. But yeah, luminalearning.com, it's just a couple of clicks away and it will go to the team immediately and we'll get right back to you.
Great. Awesome. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for being here. This was really wonderful good luck with everything else you guys are doing.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank you
much.
so
Thanks
much.
for
Thanks for
having
having us.
All right. Be good. Be well. Peace.